learned about this explorer in kindergarten. Do you remember the name of this explorer or the story of his famous voyage in 1492? This is Christopher Columbus. A voyage is a long journey that involves traveling, usually by sea or across a great distance. Columbus was an Italian explorer who thought that he could reach India from Europe by going west instead of east. He went from country to country, proposing his plan to different kings and queens to see who would give him the ships he needed to test his plan. At last, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain funded the voyage and provided the ships. Columbus's ships were named the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Despite his intention to sail to India for spices and silks, Columbus accidentally landed in the Caribbean, where he met the indigenous people already living there, the Taínos, the island Caribs, and the Guanajuato Bayes. When he arrived in the Caribbean, he thought he was in India, calling the region the West Indies, and accidentally naming the people who lived there Indians, even though they lived on the other side of the planet and had never heard of India. Columbus and others on his ship eventually made the Taínos their slaves, and many of them died. Columbus's discovery of the Americas began a long legacy of exploration of what the Europeans called the New World. The image on the left of the page shows the type of ship on which these people came to the Americas. Modern ships have engines and motors that enable them to move. The type of ship that Columbus and the other early explorers and settlers used did not have engines and motors. In order for the ships to move, sailors had to catch the wind in the ship's sails. It took much longer for these ships to cross the Atlantic Ocean than for today's ships. It took Columbus more than 63 days to travel from Europe to the Americas. Modern ships are able to travel the same distance in 6 to 8 days.
Let's look at where Columbus was sailing from and where he was trying to go. So if we start at Monticello Academy and we zoom all the way out, so there's Utah, and here's Spain. So let's look at that again. Let me zoom out for you on our globe. So if we come out on our globe, there's Utah right there. So this is the United States, this is North America. There is Monticello Academy, and way over here is Spain. That is where Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand gave Columbus his 3 ships to sail with to find India. Now let's look at where India is. That's where he was trying to go. India is clear over here. It's in the other direction. And he knew that. He knew he was going in the wrong direction because back then, the only way to get to India to get spices and silks and different things was that they would have to start here. Here's Portugal and here's Spain. They kind of liked to compete with each other at this time. And Portugal, what they had figured out is that they could go all the way down this side, this west side of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, and come all the way back up to get to India. And that was the coolest thing that anyone in the world had ever heard of. But it looks like a long ways to go, doesn't it? And so Christopher Columbus told the King and Queen of Spain, he said, hey, I have an idea. What if we go west? What if we go in the opposite direction? I bet the Earth is a lot smaller than we think. And we can just sail through the water until we get to India. The only problem with that was that little did they know, because they had never sailed that far before, there was all of this in the way. There was North America, the Caribbean, South America, and all the people who lived there and had always lived there were right in the way. And so what happened was, instead of making it to India by going this way, which if there wasn't land there, then he'd be right. He could sail all the way around and get to India. But the problem was there was a whole other civilization on this side of the planet that they had just never heard of before, because they had stuck to themselves for so long. Okay, so if he starts at India, so he started at Spain, and then when he started sailing west to try out his new trick to get to India, guess what he went into? The Bahamas. And that's where he met all of the indigenous peoples who lived there and had always lived there. So Columbus really didn't discover anything because these people had always lived there and this land had always been there. But according to Europeans, he had discovered something new because they had never heard of it before. Now, Columbus was really confused. He thought that his plan had worked and that he had landed in India. So he ended up calling the people who lived here, they were called the Taínos, he ended up naming them Indians. And he ended up naming the place they lived the West Indies to signify India. But the funny part of that is we know where India is. It's nowhere near the Americas. It's on the other side of the planet. So that's why it's kind of silly to call people whose ancestors are from the Americas. It's kind of silly to call them Indians because that was a mistake that Columbus made a long time ago, and they're not Indians. They are Americans. They are Native Americans because their ancestors lived here natively before the Europeans showed up.